Gregory's hands had broken 17 bones belonging to other men. They had signed death warrants. They had closed coffin lids over faces that would never be seen again. But right now, 3:47 in the morning, those hands were shaking, hovering 6 inches above a 4-month-old baby girl, terrified to touch her. Because every time he did, she screamed. Not a cry, not the soft fussing of a hungry infant. This was a sound no baby should know how to make, raw, shredding, as if her own skin were betraying her from the inside out. Baby Louie would arch off the mattress like she'd been touched by a live wire, her tiny fists balled so tight her fingernails left crescents in her own palms. And Gregory, a man who had once watched someone beg for 9 straight minutes before ending the conversation, would stand there, jaw locked, fists white, completely powerless. 4 months of this, 15 doctors, 3 continents, $4 million. Every specialist said the same useless thing: we can't find anything clinically wrong. The last one, a Harvard-trained neurologist, made the mistake of shrugging. Gregory flipped a mahogany desk onto him, had David drag the man out by his collar, and said 5 words that turned every nurse in the hallway pale. The next one gets buried. Because Louie was all he had left. Her mother, Annabella, died bringing her into this world. That screaming, writhing baby girl was Gregory's last connection to anything human, and he couldn't even touch her. David, his enforcer, stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "There's one more," he said. "A nurse, Southside Free Clinic." Gregory didn't look up. No credentials, none that matter on paper. Then why her? David paused. Because she notices things other people don't. But there's a problem. She doesn't work with babies. Not anymore. Gregory's eyes lifted. Why not? A silence that lasted too long. Because the last baby she held was her own, and he didn't make it. Across the city, in a studio apartment with walls thin enough to hear the neighbors pray, a woman named Zinda sat on the edge of her bed, staring at a photograph she kept face down on her nightstand. A baby boy in a yellow blanket, 3 months old, smiling. She hadn't turned that photo over in 2 years. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She let it ring. It rang again and again. She picked it up, and the voice on the other end asked her to do the one thing she had sworn she would never do again. What happened next didn't just save a baby's life. It exposed a betrayal so deep it nearly brought down an empire. And it started the moment Zinda walked through those gates and did the one thing 15 world-class doctors never thought to try. Nothing. Before we go any further, if stories like this one find you at exactly the right moment, you're not here by accident. Subscribe now so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. These stories reach further than you believe. Let's see how far. The call lasted 11 seconds. A woman named Linda, Zinda's supervisor at the clinic, gave her an address and said 3 words: "They need you." Zinda said no. Linda said, "It's a baby, Zinda, 4 months old." Zinda's throat closed. She said no again. Then Linda said something that cracked the wall. She said, "This child is in pain every second of every day, and no one on earth knows why." And Zinda hung up the phone, sat in the dark for 6 minutes, and then packed a bag. She told herself it was clinical, observation only. She wouldn't have to hold anyone. David arrived at 5:15 in the morning. Black SUV, tinted windows, engine idling like a held breath. He didn't come to the door. He didn't honk. He just waited. Hands wrapped around the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Knuckles pale, jaw set, like a man delivering someone to a place he wasn't sure they'd come back from. Zinda climbed in wearing scrubs she'd washed so many times the blue had gone gray. There was a bleach stain near the hem that she'd stopped noticing a year ago. She carried one bag, no equipment, no instruments, just a notebook, 2 pens, and a change of clothes. They didn't speak for 20 minutes. The city thinned. Strip malls turned to tree lines. Chain link turned to stone walls, and then the gates appeared, wrought iron, 12 feet tall, topped with cameras that tracked the SUV like black eyes. The driveway beyond was a quarter-mile of silence, manicured hedges, gravel that crunched under the tires like crushed teeth, and at the end, a house that didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress designed by a man who believed love was a security liability. Henry, the head of household staff, met him at the front door. He was 60, silver-haired, immaculate, but his eyes carried the particular exhaustion of someone who has watched a tragedy unfold in slow motion and been powerless to stop it. He looked at Zinda the way you look at the last candle in a blackout. He said, "Right this way," and nothing else. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and cold stone. Somewhere above them, muffled by walls and distance, Zinda could hear it, the crying, faint from here, but constant, a sound that had soaked into the walls of this house like weather. Henry stopped at a door, knocked once, opened it. Gregory didn't stand. He didn't turn. He sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived a war. Coffee rings, a cracked glass, papers scattered like debris. The room was expensive the way a mausoleum is expensive, polished, airless, built to outlast the people inside it. Behind him, on a shelf, a single framed photograph, a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, Annabella. The frame was spotless. Everything else in the room was chaos. He spoke without looking at her. 15 doctors, Johns Hopkins, Geneva, Tokyo, the best money can buy, all of them failed. He paused. "You're from a free clinic on the South Side that treats strep throat and sprained ankles." His eyes found hers. They were not cruel. They were worse. They were empty. "Give me one reason I shouldn't have David drive you back right now." Zinda's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her thighs to stop it. She could feel David standing behind her in the doorway like a wall. She could feel Henry's pity radiating from the hall, and she could hear it, bleeding through the baby monitor on Gregory's desk, small and relentless, Louis crying. That sound entered Zinda's chest like a fishhook. She looked at the monitor, then back at Gregory. Because those 15 doctors were trying to fix her. Her voice was steady, but barely. "I just want to understand her." Gregory stared at her for a long time, the kind of silence that makes most people fill it with apologies or explanations. Zinda did neither. She just stood there, hands still shaking against her legs, and refused to look away. 48 hours, he said. Zinda nodded. Then Henry walked her upstairs, opened the nursery door, and she saw, for the first time, what $4 million of medicine had done to a baby's room. It looked like a hospital had swallowed a child.
3 monitors. 2 IV stands, a humidifier pumping medicated mist, a shelf lined with 11 different prescription bottles, creams, drops, oral suspensions, each one labeled in Marcel's precise handwriting, a pulse oximeter clipped to a foot so small it barely registered, and in the center of it all, in a crib that probably cost more than Zinda's rent for a year, a baby girl the size of a loaf of bread, whimpering like she'd forgotten how to stop. Zinda stood in the doorway and didn't move. Henry gestured gently. "Dr. Marcel is just finishing up." Marcel was mid-40s, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed shirt beneath his white coat. His hands, gloved, latex, clinical, moved across the baby with practiced efficiency. He was adjusting something on the IV line. He looked up at Zinda with the kind of smile that reaches the mouth but auditions for the eyes and doesn't get the part. "You must be the nurse," he said. "Welcome. I'll walk you through her protocol. It's quite involved." Zinda stepped closer. She wasn't looking at Marcel. She was counting bottles. Hydrocortisone, cetirizine suspension, a compounded topical she didn't recognize, prescription-grade formula in a canister with no commercial label, just Marcel's handwriting again, neat and small. "Who prescribed all of this?" she asked. Marcel's hands paused, just for a beat, a quarter second. Then they resumed. "I did. I've been with this family for 12 years, before Louis, before Annabella." He said the dead woman's name the way people handle antiques, carefully, aware of the value, but not personally attached. "I know this child's history better than anyone alive." Zinda nodded. She said nothing else, but she was doing math in her head. 11 medications for a 4-month-old whose blood work, according to every specialist, came back clean. That wasn't treatment. That was a siege. A voice floated in from the hallway, bright, musical, wrong. "Oh, you're here already." Daria appeared in the doorway holding a small glass vase of white lilies, William's wife. She was beautiful in a way that felt curated, every strand of hair intentional, every gesture rehearsed to look unrehearsed. She placed the flowers on the windowsill, leaned over the crib and whispered something sweet to Louis. Then she turned to Zinda with wide, warm eyes. "We're all just so grateful someone new is trying. Poor Gregory has been absolutely destroyed by this." She touched Zinda's arm. "Let me know if you need anything at all." Her fingers were cold. A moment later, William appeared behind her, Gregory's older brother. He was taller, broader, carried himself like a man who had grown comfortable standing in the wings. He clapped Zinda on the back, firm, familiar, as if they'd known each other for years instead of seconds. "We're all praying you can help," he said. "Gregory is not himself." He shook his head slowly. "Hasn't been since Annabella. This thing with Louis is breaking what's left of him." His concern was shaped perfectly. Every word landed where it should, and that was the problem. It sounded like a line delivered by a man who'd practiced it in the mirror, not grief, a performance of grief. Zinda thanked them both, said very little, watched them leave. William's hand on the small of Daria's back, Daria glancing once over her shoulder at Marcel, Marcel meeting her eyes for exactly 1 second before looking away. 1 second. That's all it was. But Zinda had spent 10 years in underfunded clinics where you didn't have fancy equipment. You had your eyes, and your eyes either learned to catch what didn't belong or people died. That glance didn't belong. She turned back to the crib. Louis had gone quiet, not peaceful, just exhausted. Her skin was mottled red, inflamed from wrist to shoulder, as if her own body were rejecting itself. She was so small, so impossibly small. Zinda reached down. Her hand moved toward the baby's arm, instinct, muscle memory, the thing a nurse does without thinking. And then she stopped. Her fingers curled, her hand pulled back to her chest like it had touched a flame. But the baby hadn't screamed. The baby hadn't even flinched. It was Zinda's body that refused. Some locked door inside her, rusted shut for 2 years. The mansion didn't sleep. It just got quieter, quiet enough to hear the bones of the house settle,
quiet enough to hear the wind pressing against glass that cost more than Zinda's entire apartment building. And underneath it all, threaded through the walls like a pulse, Louie's crying, muffled now, distant but constant. Zinda sat on the edge of the guest bed in a room nicer than any place she'd ever lived. Egyptian cotton sheets, a bathroom with heated floors, a window overlooking gardens that were manicured by people who probably earned more than she did. None of it registered. She was staring at her phone. Not at a message, not at the time. At a photograph she kept buried 3 folders deep, inside an album she'd labeled with a single period, just a dot, so no one scrolling would ever think to open it. A baby boy, 3 months old, yellow blanket, smiling, not at the camera, but at something just past it. Probably her hand. She couldn't remember anymore. She'd tried to remember 10,000 times, and the details kept shifting, kept decaying, like a tape played so often the sound wore thin. His name was Elias. He died on a Tuesday, 2:14 in the morning. A cardiac event, that was the language on the report. Sudden, silent, no warning, no cry. That was the part that lived inside her like a splinter she couldn't reach. There had been no cry. He didn't scream. He didn't call for her. He just stopped, 10 feet from where she slept. A nurse, a trained, certified, supposedly competent nurse who spent her days monitoring vital signs and reading symptoms in strangers' children. And her own son died in the next room without making a sound, and she didn't wake up. She found him at 6 in the morning, still warm, still soft, but gone. She held him for 45 minutes before she called anyone. She knew he was dead. She knew there was nothing to be done, but she held him anyway because her hands didn't know how to put him down. Her hands hadn't known how to hold anything small since. She transferred to geriatric care 3 weeks after the funeral. Old hands, papery skin, bodies that had already lived. She could touch those without her chest caving in. She could check pulses and adjust IV lines and say goodnight to people whose deaths, when they came, would be expected, natural, not an ambush in the dark. And now she was here, in a mansion full of money and secrets, listening to a baby cry through the walls the way Elias never did. Louie screamed like she was begging someone to hear her, and Zinda, who would have given everything she owned to hear Elias make that sound, any sound, one single sound that night, sat on a guest bed and felt the cruelty of that symmetry like a hand around her throat. She put the phone face down, pressed her palms against her eyes, breathed. Then she stood up, walked down the hallway, stopped in the nursery doorway. Louie was whimpering now, the space between cries growing longer, not because the pain had stopped, but because the baby was too tired to sustain it. Her tiny chest rose and fell in stuttered rhythms. The monitors beeped their indifferent green. The room smelled like medicated lotion and something sterile and wrong. Zinda didn't step inside, not yet. She leaned against the doorframe and whispered, so quietly that no one alive would ever know she said it. "I'm not ready to hold you yet, but I'm not leaving either." She pulled a chair from the hallway into the doorway, sat down, opened her notebook, and she stopped thinking like a nurse. She started thinking like a mother. Not what's wrong with this baby, not what diagnosis fits, just when does she hurt, when does she rest, when does the screaming start, and what happened in the minutes before. By dawn she had filled 4 pages, not with medical terminology, with patterns. and one of those patterns made her read it twice, then circle it, then underline it so hard the pen tore through the paper. The crying didn't start when someone touched Louis. It started 30 minutes after she was fed, every single time.
Zinda didn't sleep for 72 hours. Not because she couldn't. The guest bed was the softest thing her body had ever touched. She didn't sleep because the notebook wouldn't let her. Every time she closed her eyes, the pattern pulsed behind her lids like a second heartbeat, demanding she look closer. So she watched. She sat in that doorway chair, sometimes the nursery, sometimes the hallway outside it, and she logged everything. Time of day, room temperature, who entered, who left, when the humidifier kicked on, when the lights were dimmed, when Louis was bathed, changed, held, put down. She tracked it all with the obsessive precision of a woman who had learned the hard way that the thing that kills doesn't always announce itself. And by the third morning, her notebook looked like the work of someone losing her mind or finding something everyone else had been too sophisticated to see. She had drawn a chart on the last 2 pages, crude, hand-ruled with a ballpoint pen. Along the top, time. Along the side, pain level, graded 1 through 10 based on the intensity of Louis's cries, and cutting through that chart like a jagged ridgeline, a pattern so consistent it almost looked engineered. The spikes didn't follow touch. They didn't follow handling or bathing or diaper changes. They followed feeding. Every single spike began 25 to 40 minutes after Louis was given her formula. And the larger the feeding, the higher the spike. A small feed at 2 a.m., moderate fussing by 2:30. A full feed at 6 a.m., screaming by 6:40 that didn't stop for an hour. Every doctor for 4 months had been chasing the wrong variable. They tested skin, they tested nerves, they tested allergies and autoimmune responses and genetic abnormalities. They ran scans that cost more than Zinda's annual salary, and not one of them thought to sit in a chair for 3 days and simply watch a baby eat and then suffer. Because they were looking for a disease, Zinda was looking for a sequence. She found Marcel in the nursery that afternoon, preparing the next feeding. He worked with the same gloved efficiency she'd noticed on day 1, measuring the formula from the unmarked canister, mixing it with filtered water at a precise temperature. His movements were rehearsed, mechanical, the kind of routine a person builds when they don't want to think about what they're doing. "Dr. Marcel," she said, "I'd like to review the ingredient list for Louis's formula." His hands stopped, not dramatically, not in a way anyone watching casually would notice, but Zinda wasn't watching casually. She'd spent a decade in clinics where a half-second pause from a patient meant the difference between a headache and a hemorrhage. "It's a proprietary compound," he said, resuming his work, "designed specifically for Louis's nutritional needs. Gregory approved it months ago." "Proprietary," Zinda repeated. "Custom formulations often are." He smiled that same audition smile. "I can assure you it's been reviewed thoroughly." "By whom?" He looked at her. The smile held, but something behind it shifted, like a door clicking locked. "By me. I've been with this family for 12 years. The same answer, word for word, the same 12 years deployed like a credential and a warning simultaneously. Zinda nodded, let it go, walked away. But she didn't let it go. She found Henry in the kitchen, polishing silver he'd probably polished 1,000 times. She kept her voice low, conversational, the voice you use when you don't want the walls to carry what you're saying. "Henry, has anyone other than Dr. Marcel ever handled Louis's formula, mixed it, measured it, anything?" Henry set down the cloth, thought about it the way honest people think, slowly, carefully, actually searching the memory. "No,"
he said. Dr. Marcel was quite specific about that from the beginning. He insisted on preparing every feeding himself, wouldn't let the night staff near it. He said the measurements were too sensitive for anyone else to handle. She thanked him, walked back to the guest room, sat down on the bed. She opened her notebook to a blank page. In the center, she wrote one word, Marcel. Then she drew a circle around it, and for the first time in 2 years, her hands weren't shaking. She found Henry at 11 that night and asked him to do something that sounded insane. I need you to clear the nursery. Everything. Every cream, every monitor lead touching her skin, every prescription bottle, the IV, the humidifier, all of it. Henry stared at her. She could see the arithmetic behind his eyes, the risk of saying yes weighed against the 4 months of screaming that said everything else had already failed. Dr. Marcel won't approve, he said. I'm not asking Dr. Marcel. Henry was quiet for a long time. Then he set down the silver he was polishing and stood. It took them 20 minutes. They worked in silence, moving like thieves in a house full of sleeping wolves. The monitors came off first, then the IV stand, then the shelf of bottles, 11 of them, each one a failure dressed in a medical label. The humidifier, the medicated mist cartridge, the pulse oximeter, gone, all of it, until the nursery was just a room with a crib and a window and a baby. Earlier that evening, Zinda had called Linda at the clinic and asked her to pull donor breast milk from the hospital bank. Linda didn't ask why, she just did it. David picked it up without being told what it was. The bag sat warming now in a basin of water on the counter. Simple, unmodified, nothing added by anyone's hands. Zinda fed Louis at 11:30. The baby took it slowly, uncertain, as if the taste of something that hadn't been engineered confused her, but she drank, and Zinda set her back down and waited. 30 minutes, the window where the screaming always began. 25 minutes passed. Louis stirred, fussed. 30 minutes. No spike, no arching, no convulsions, just a baby, uncomfortable, whimpering, but not screaming, not burning from the inside. Zinda's breath caught. The formula. It had always been the formula. But the whimpering continued, softer, different, not pain, something older. The sound a baby makes when she has been untouched for so long that her body has forgotten what comfort feels like. A sound that was asking, without language, without knowledge, without anything except instinct, will someone hold me? Zinda stood over the crib. The room was dim, the mansion was silent, and her hands were trembling again, but not like before. Not the tremor of observation or suspicion. This was the old shaking, the one that lived in the marrow, the one that started 6 in the morning when she picked up a baby who was already gone and held him for 45 minutes because her hands didn't know how to let go. Those same hands now hovered above Louis. No gloves, no latex barrier. Nothing between her skin and the baby's skin except 2 years of grief and the suffocating belief that she didn't deserve to do this again. She breathed. She reached down. She picked up Louis with her bare hands. The baby tensed. Every muscle in that tiny body braced. 4 months of conditioned agony, expecting the fire to start. Zinda pressed her against her chest, skin to skin. She didn't bounce, didn't shush, didn't rock. She just held. The way you hold something you're terrified of breaking. The way you hold something that's already broken you once. 5 seconds. The tension in Louis's body wavered. 10 seconds. The whimper softened to a breath. 20 seconds. Silence. Not the silence of exhaustion, not the silence of giving up. The silence of a baby who for the first time in her life had been held by hands that carried nothing, no medicine, no agenda, no clinical distance, just warmth, just presence, just a woman who knew exactly what it felt like to lose a child, holding one who had never been found. Zinda stood in the dark, in a Mafia boss's mansion, with a baby asleep against her heart. And she cried, silently, not for Louis, for Elias, for the morning she found him still and warm, for 2 years of refusing to hold anything small enough to lose. Down the hallway, Gregory heard something he hadn't heard in 4 months. Nothing. He walked to the nursery doorway. He saw the nurse, this woman from a clinic that treated coughs, standing in the dark, holding his daughter, both of them trembling, neither of them screaming. He didn't speak. He didn't enter. He just stood there, watching. And for the first time in 4 months, his fists unclenched. For the first time in 4 months, that baby was silent. But what Zinda was about to discover hiding inside that formula would turn this household upside down and reveal that the people praying loudest for Louis's recovery were the same ones making sure she never got better. If this story has you holding your breath, hit that like button right now and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because we're not even close to the darkest part yet.
By morning, the news had moved through the estate like a rumor through a church. The baby slept. 3 consecutive hours. No screaming, no arching, no medicated mist, no IV drip, no 11 bottles of prescription failure lined up like soldiers on a shelf. Just a woman, a chair, and bare hands. Henry told the kitchen staff. The kitchen staff told the groundskeeper told the driver, and by the time Zinda came downstairs at 7 a.m., exhausted, eyes swollen, still wearing yesterday's scrubs, every person in that house looked at her like she'd performed an exorcism. Everyone except Gregory. Gregory looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he doesn't have the key to. Not gratitude, not yet. Confusion. The particular kind of confusion that afflicts people who have spent their entire lives believing that money solves everything, and then watch a woman in bleach-stained scrubs do what $4 million couldn't. He stood by the kitchen counter, coffee untouched, watching her cross the hallway, and said nothing, but his eyes followed her hands. William arrived at 9. He came through the front door the way he always did, unhurried, expensive, carrying himself like a man who had rehearsed ease until it became indistinguishable from the real thing. He embraced Gregory at the door, held the hug 1 second longer than necessary, pulled back with both hands on his brother's shoulders, and said, "I heard. My God, Gregory, I heard she actually slept." Gregory nodded, said little. William found Zinda in the nursery. He brought her coffee in a porcelain cup, not a mug, a cup with a saucer, as if she were a guest at a dinner party instead of a nurse running on no sleep. He handed it to her with both hands and a smile that arrived fully assembled. "You're a miracle worker," he said. "Truly. We've been praying for months." Zinda thanked him, took the coffee, didn't drink it. Because while William spoke, his eyes moved, just once, a flick, fast, involuntary, the kind of glance a person makes when they're checking if their partner has read the same page. His eyes went to Marcel, who stood near the window pretending to review a chart. Marcel returned the look, a nod so small it barely qualified as movement. Zinda saw it. She didn't react. She'd learned long ago that the most dangerous thing you can do with information is show that you have it.
Daria appeared minutes later. Same lilies, same warmth, same cold fingers. She leaned against the doorframe and tilted her head at Zinda with theatrical curiosity. "So you think the formula was the problem? Interesting." She let the word hang. "What will you do about it?" It wasn't a question. It was a measurement. Daria trying to gauge exactly how much Zinda knew and how far she intended to go with it. Zinda smiled, said something vague about further observation, and then, an hour later, when the hallway was empty and the nursery was quiet, she sat across from Gregory in his office and said the thing she'd been building toward since dawn. "I want to send a sample of Marcel's formula to an independent lab. I have a friend, Jean. She does toxicology work. It won't cost you anything." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Marcel has been with this family for 12 years. "I know. He delivered Louis. I know that too." Gregory looked at the baby monitor. Louis was sleeping, actually sleeping. The green light pulsed steady and calm, a rhythm this house had never known. "Do it," he said. Zinda left the office. She didn't see Marcel standing in the shadow at the end of the hallway, close enough to hear, still enough to be mistaken for furniture. She didn't see his face, the rehearsed calm cracking just enough to show something cold and cornered underneath. Marcel waited until her footsteps faded. Then he pulled out his phone, dialed a number he knew from memory. It rang twice. "We have a problem," he said. "She wants to test the formula." The voice on the other end was unhurried, controlled, familiar. William's voice. "Handle it." The line went dead, and somewhere upstairs, Louis slept on, unaware that the hands claiming to pray for her recovery were the same ones that had been engineering her pain.
Zinda drove the sample to Jean's lab herself. David offered the SUV. She refused. She took a cab, $26 she couldn't afford, because something in her gut told her that the fewer people in that house who knew where she was going, the better. Jean's lab was a basement office at a university hospital on the east side. Fluorescent lights, grant-funded equipment, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. Jean didn't ask questions. She looked at the unlabeled canister, looked at Zinda's face, and said, "How fast do you need this?" Zinda said, "A baby's been consuming it for 4 months." Jean put down her coffee and started working. Back at the estate, Marcel made his move. He found Gregory alone in the study, the room where the desk still bore the crack from the neurologist incident. Marcel closed the door behind him, softly, respectfully, the way a man closes a door when he wants the conversation to feel private instead of conspiratorial. "Gregory, I need to speak with you as your physician and as someone who loved Annabella." That name, deployed like a key to a lock Marcel knew would always open. He sat across from Gregory and spoke in measured tones, careful, concerned. The performance of a man protecting a child delivered by a man poisoning one. "This nurse, she has no pediatric credentials, no hospital affiliation. She's removed every safeguard I put in place and replaced my formula with unregulated donor milk. If Louis develops an infection, a nutritional deficiency, anything, it's on you." He paused. "I've been with this family for 12 years. She's been here for 3 days." Gregory said nothing, but his eyes darkened. The confusion from that morning, the open, unlocked look he'd had watching Zinda, began to close. Marcel saw it happen and pressed. "I'm not asking you to send her away. I'm asking you to consider what happens if she's wrong." Marcel left. The doubt stayed. It sat in Gregory's chest for 2 hours. Then David knocked. David didn't sit down. He rarely did. He stood in the doorway,
the same doorway where he'd stood when he first suggested Zinda and spoke with the blunt economy of a man who had no use for performance. The nurse made your daughter stop screaming. The doctor didn't. Trust what you saw. Gregory looked at him. David held the gaze. Then he left. That night, at 9:15, Daria found Zinda in the upstairs hallway. The lilies were gone. The warmth was gone. The theatrical tilt of the head, the wide eyes, the carefully assembled concern, all of it, stripped away like paint off a wall, revealing the surface underneath. Cold, flat, calculating. Daria stepped close enough that Zinda could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that suddenly smelled like a warning. "You should leave this house," Daria said. Her voice was low, unhurried, and carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You don't understand the forces you're interfering with. This isn't about a baby." Zinda looked at her, studied the architecture of a woman who just, in 6 seconds, confirmed everything Zinda suspected, that the concern was theater, that the flowers were camouflage, and that whatever was happening to Louis had roots far deeper than a doctor's formula. "It's always about the baby," Zinda said. Daria's eyes narrowed. She held Zinda's gaze for a long moment, long enough to make it a threat, then turned and walked away. Her heels clicked down the marble hallway like a countdown. Zinda's phone rang at 11. Jean's voice was different. The casual warmth was gone, replaced by something tight and professional, the voice of a scientist who has found something she wishes she hadn't. "Zinda, listen to me carefully. The formula contains a synthetic neuropathic compound. It induces progressive tactile allodynia. It essentially rewires pain receptors so that normal touch registers as burning." She paused. "This isn't contamination. The compound was integrated into the base, deliberately, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Zinda sat on the guest bed in the dark, the phone pressed against her ear, Louis sleeping down the hall, the mansion silent around her. Someone had been poisoning that baby since the day she was born, and they were still in the house.
Zinda didn't knock. She walked into Gregory's study at 6 in the morning, holding a single sheet of paper, and closed the door behind her. Gregory was standing by the window, watching the grounds lighten with dawn, a cup of coffee in his hand that he hadn't touched. He turned, saw her face, set the cup down. Whatever she was about to say, his body knew before his mind did. "Your daughter has been poisoned," Zinda said, "through her formula, deliberately, for months, by someone with access to her nursery and your trust. She didn't soften it, didn't ease into it, didn't wrap it in clinical language or hedge it with maybes. She handed him Jean's report, the compound identified, the concentration mapped, the conclusion underlined in Jean's handwriting. Intentional incorporation, not contamination, not error. And she watched Gregory read it. He read it once, then again. His eyes stopped moving but stayed on the page, as if rereading the same line over and over, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that didn't mean what they meant. They didn't rearrange. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, slowly, the way ice forms, invisible at first, then total. His knuckles went white. The wood creaked under his fingers. The coffee cup rattled against the saucer from the vibration. He said one word. "Who?" Not a question, a detonation compressed into a single syllable. Zinda said the formula was prepared exclusively by one person, every feeding, every batch, for 4 months. No one else was allowed to touch it. Gregory's eyes lifted from the paper, and whatever lived behind them, whatever he kept locked in the basement of himself, the thing that had built an empire and buried the men who opposed it, that thing was awake now. "Bring him to me." David found Marcel in the nursery, adjusting equipment that was no longer there. He didn't explain. He took Marcel by the arm, not roughly, not gently, just inevitably, and walked him to the study. David closed the door, locked it, stood in front of it. Marcel looked at the lock, looked at David, looked at Gregory, who was holding the lab report the way a man holds a photograph of something that has been stolen from him. Marcel stopped talking. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Then Gregory set the report on the desk, turned it to face Marcel, and said, "Explain this." Marcel tried. He started with denial. Fabricated, contaminated, unreliable lab. Gregory didn't blink. Marcel shifted to deflection. The nurse tampered with it. She's been undermining my treatment from day one. Gregory didn't blink. And when Marcel looked to the locked door and realized that the only way out of this room ran through the man standing in front of it, he crumbled, not slowly, all at once, like a building that had been condemned for years, finally meeting the wind that finishes it. It was William and Daria. They approached me before Louis was born. The plan was never to kill her, just to keep her in pain, constant, unexplainable pain. Marcel's voice was shaking now, thin and reedy and stripped of every pretense. A suffering baby means a suffering you, and a suffering you means a distracted boss. While you were in the nursery every night, William was taking your territory, your lieutenants, your accounts. He said, Marcel swallowed, he said it wouldn't cause permanent damage. Gregory moved around the desk, slowly, each step deliberate. He stopped 18 inches from Marcel's face and spoke in a voice so quiet it barely qualified as sound. "You made my daughter scream for 4 months. Do you know what I do to people who make the people I love scream?" David stepped forward. The room contracted. And then Zinda stepped between them. Not dramatically, not with a speech. She just moved, placed herself in the space between Gregory's hands and Marcel's throat, and looked up at a man who could have moved her aside like a curtain. "Not like this," she said. Her voice was steady. "Louis needs a father, not a prisoner. Call the police. Let him rot in a cell, not in a grave you have to carry." Gregory looked at her. The monster in him was howling. She could see it behind his eyes, clawing, screaming, demanding the justice his world had always delivered with fists and silence and shallow graves. But Louis was sleeping upstairs, and for the first time in 4 months, she was sleeping without pain. Gregory picked up the phone, and his hands, the hands that had broken 17 bones, signed death warrants, closed coffin lids, dialed 3 numbers, 911.
They arrested William at his own dining table. He was eating breakfast, poached eggs, fresh pressed juice, linen napkin tucked into his collar, when David walked in with 2 detectives and a warrant built on Marcel's full testimony, 6 months of encrypted messages, and financial records showing the systematic dismantling of Gregory's empire conducted from this very house, at this very table, over meals just like this one. Daria screamed, threw a glass, called her lawyer before the handcuffs touched her wrists. William didn't. William set down his fork, wiped his mouth, straightened his tie with the calm precision of a man who had always believed he was the smarter brother and saw no reason to stop now. He looked at Gregory, who stood in the doorway, not entering, just watching, and said the only words he had left. "You were always too soft." Gregory studied his brother's face, the face he'd grown up beside, the face that had sat across from him at their father's funeral, at Annabella's funeral, at the christening of the baby girl he'd been quietly destroying ever since. "My daughter is alive," Gregory said. His voice was low, measured, the voice of a man who had chosen, for the first time in his life, not to let the monster answer. "Your empire is gone. Tell me again who's soft." William was led out in handcuffs. He never looked back. The news moved through Gregory's organization like weather, impossible to contain, impossible to ignore. The boss had been betrayed by blood, and instead of burying the problem in concrete, he'd called the police. In his world, that should have been weakness, but the men who worked for Gregory watched him stand in his foyer after the arrest, holding his daughter against his chest, the same daughter who had screamed at every touch for 4 months, now sleeping, silent, her fingers curled against his collar. And not one of them mistook what they saw for weakness. It looked, for the first time any of them could remember, like something they didn't have a word for. The closest one was grace. In the weeks that followed, Louie healed. The compound left her system slowly, then all at once, like a fever breaking. The redness faded from her skin. The hypersensitivity dulled, then disappeared. She gained weight. Her cheeks filled out. And one Tuesday morning, while Zinda was changing her on the nursery table, Louie looked up at her and smiled. Not a reflex, not gas, a real, gummy, lopsided, ridiculous smile, the kind that has no purpose except to prove that joy is the body's default setting when you stop poisoning it. Henry saw it from the hallway and had to leave the room. David saw it later that afternoon and said nothing, but he stood in the nursery doorway for a very long time. Gregory offered Zinda money, the kind of number that has too many zeros to feel real. She said no. He offered her a position, private suite, full salary, medical resources, anything she needed. She looked at him with those steady, exhausted, unbreakable eyes and said, "I don't need a suite. I just need you to let me do my job." She stayed, not as staff, not as a savior, not as the woman who cracked the case or caught the villain or earned the reward. She stayed as the person who sits in the nursery at 3 in the morning when the world is dark and holds the baby who taught her it was safe to hold again. The final night looked like this. The nursery, moonlight through the window, Zinda asleep in the rocking chair, her head tilted to one side, her breathing slow and even, and Louie curled against her chest, rising and falling with each breath, like a small boat on a calm sea. And Louie's hand, that impossibly tiny hand, wrapped around Zinda's index finger, holding on, the way you hold on to something you found after everyone told you it was lost. Gregory stood in the doorway. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. But he did something he hadn't since Annabella died. He whispered a name. Not nurse, not Miss Zinda, just Zinda. And somewhere in her sleep, she heard it. 2 broken people, 1 baby, and the courage to hold on when everything in their past told them to let go. If this story moved you, if you felt that silence in the nursery, if you felt Gregory's fists unclench, if you felt Louie's tiny fingers wrap around Zinda's hand, then do me a favor, hit subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear that healing doesn't cost millions, it costs presence. And leave a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Thank you for staying until the end. Not everyone does, but you did, and that means something.